Welcome, everybody. Joe Tarnowski here with ECRM, and I wanted to thank you all for joining us on today's webinar. Our presenter today is Bethany Gomez, the Managing Director for Brightfield Group, which provides strategic data and analysis for the CBD and cannabis industries. And today we're going to talk about CBD and consumer channel trends and what we learned from 2020, which has been an interesting year to say the least, as far as retail goes. So, and we're going to do things a little bit differently this time. We're going to have more discussion and less slides. And we want you all to be a part of this discussion. So please, at any time during the webcast, feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A tool below. Don't use the chat function, use the Q&A tool below, and we will get to those questions during the Q&A portion of the webcast. So with that, let's get started. So Bethany, thank you so much for joining us. And to kick things off, what were the biggest highlights from 2020 as far as the CBD industry goes?
Absolutely. 2020 was definitely a very interesting year, to say the least, for the world overall, and CBD was no exception. So certainly the highlight of 2020 and kind of the biggest story for around the world was COVID, and the way that impacted CBD really, impacted different brands and different channels, and in different ways. So the primary, one of the biggest impacts that COVID had was a different channel strategy that many consumers were starting to take. As soon as consumers went into lockdown, there was a greater adoption or appreciation for online, right? There was a big push towards e-commerce purchasing, but also a big push towards direct-to-consumer marketing. And consumers were doing a lot more discovery online than they ever have before. Previously, a lot of brands, most of the largest brands, had gained a lot of success through brick and mortar channels by using those channels as a way to educate consumers. But with consumers kind of avoiding human contact as though their life depends on it, consumers were really pushed online to really research and understand CBD in new ways. So the brands that have been the most successful, through 2020, were ones that really prioritized connecting with consumers online, both to support their e-commerce platforms, but also just to build their brand and drive consumers, consumer awareness and consideration, and drive consumers into stores to pick up brands there as well. There's also certainly a trend in 2020 towards price compression, right? This is even prior to COVID hitting, with some of the bumper crops of hemp at the end of 2019, the price of CBD plummeted, from to average prices of $40 or less per bottle for many different products, or even into much more affordable single serve products. And this has been really effective for growing consumer penetration, and allowing these products to compete more effectively in mass market channels, against standard OTC or other supplement type products as well. So those are some of the biggest stories, as well as just in overall consumer adoption. Consumers have kind of grown up and really started understanding a lot more of what CBD is and what it does, and have found ways for this to integrate into their lifestyles in a much more consistent way. So instead of seeing massive adoption of new users that had no idea what these products did or really what to expect out of them, and they might dabble and use it a little bit here or there, we saw a lot more consumers really transitioning into using CBD on a daily basis, using it consistently, and using it in higher dosages. So it was really an indication that the market really grew up, and the consumer segment and their understanding really grew up. But it was also not necessarily the easiest year for many brands in the space, as they had to really pivot their strategies, both their retail strategies, their pricing strategies, their marketing strategies, and at this point the industry is starting to level off and starting to kind of solidify, if that makes sense.
Yep, and what you said about consumer adoption, I really saw a turning point when my parents started using CBD, because at first when we launched our first ECRM CBD program, what was it, 2 years ago, two and a
Mhm,
half years ago, it was so new. My parents didn't know what it was, whatever. But then last year they
mhm,
started using it, and
uh-huh,
they were using it for different reasons. My
mhm,
dad was using it for back pain,
mhm.
and my mom was using it for, she had some nerve pain. So my
Yeah.
dad was using a tincture, my mom was using topicals.
Mm,
But like you said, they started doing a lot of research on a
mhm,
CBD, and and then obviously they were picking my brain a lot from
mhm.
what I learned in discussions with buyers and suppliers. So, but it was a big,
Mhm.
realization at that point that, okay, if they're using it now, it's really starting
Yeah.
to reach the general consumer.
Right. And that's, it's a really good point, Joe, because, at the beginning, 2019 was this big wave of kind of excitement around CBD when everybody started just figuring out what it was. But it was really a lot of the kind of, people that were at the forefront of, trying new wellness trends that
Mhm,
were, the first to drive in on CBD. Some of them were cannabis users. Some of them were just familiar with a lot of different supplements or functional ingredients. But as CBD's acceptance level and kind of the understanding and awareness around CBD, grew, the market started to stabilize and reach more of the average consumer. And those consumers, like your parents, are really using now on, for real reasons and using on a daily, consistent basis,
mhm,
and treating CBD more as, a supplement. So that background has changed a lot, and it's in no small part due to kind of the education levels that brands have been really pushing forward. It's obviously been a really significant challenge for brands, to be able to educate consumers in a landscape where you can't really make claims,
yeah,
in any real way. So that becomes, has been challenging, but brands really did in 2020, I think, find a way to connect with consumers and, level set expectations of what their products are and
mhm,
what they do. And that was, largely by using these additional functional ingredients that they can piggyback on the claims for.
yep,
So, if you create a CBD product that also has melatonin in it, you can position it for sleep, right?
yep,
If you create a CBD product that also has arnica in it, you can position it for pain, or,
mhm,
et cetera, et cetera. And, so those types of, positioning, based products help to level set, expectations with consumers of what does this product actually do, without making, wild outlandish claims like it's going to cure cancer, or things
mhm.
like that, that may fly in the face of the FDA and just be generally unethical, for consumers.
Yeah, and it
Um,
makes it more relatable. It's a more
yeah.
relatable
Mhm,
product. They know, they see this
mhm,
ingredient, they see melatonin, they know what it
mhm,
means, they know what it's for,
mhm.
which is a good way to bridge that gap between the pure CBD consumers and just the general mass consumer who's not familiar with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that we found, that was really interesting, and we, at the beginning of the pandemic at Brightfield, we started tracking, consumers' reactions, CBD consumer reactions to COVID, and how this was impacting, their overall consumption patterns, right? And how are they thinking about it? Because on the one side, CBD products are not necessarily cheap, right? They're products that are, oftentimes premium, or, significant price points, in a time when there's a global recession, and a lot of
Mhm,
people are very, economically concerned, right? Or economically impacted. On the other hand, these products are also, really designed and positioned to be able to treat a lot of the conditions that the pandemic is driving. So anxiety, stress, depression, there are so much, in the pandemic has impacted consumers' mental health, in a very prominent way, and drawn a lot more attention to, mental health. So as a result, many consumers are finding that they are, really increasing their CBD consumption, due to the pandemic as well. So when we look at some of the stats here, we found that generally younger generations, so that Gen Z, millennial, Gen Gen X, consumers are the ones that are report using CBD more frequently now because of the pandemic, because would overwhelmingly agree that CBD helps me deal with the stress of the pandemic. That's something that they wouldn't want to do without, at this juncture. So that's something that, one angle of it. Now, of course, those kind of increased consumption doesn't always align directly with increase in sales for many brands, largely because of this price compression that we talked about. So there's all of these, as prices drop, really across the board, as well as, this kind of really rampant culture of discounting, that's taken place in the CBD industry, that's allowed consumers oftentimes for the same price point or even lower to be able to, to consume even more CBD than they were previously. It's interesting here when we look at some of the, the impact on channel purchases, we're seeing, really kind of divergent trends. And, of course, with when everybody went into lockdown in Q2, we saw, e-commerce sales skyrocket, right? The online sales more than doubled over the course of 1 quarter, right? So I think it was about 22% of consumers or so before the pandemic were purchasing online. 44%, were purchasing online after, after lockdown occurred. And we have seen those, those percentages, continue to hold. Many consumers are finding, e-commerce to be, a favorable experience to be able to, have that consistency and come back and, and purchase the same products. But really one thing that we found was that, there's nothing like brick and mortar to drive trial, right? Yeah. That with e-commerce, and, this is one thing we always say to our clients is that, e-commerce is great. Yes, it's easy to some extent. You can put up an e-commerce store, but that doesn't mean that people are actually going to come in to buy it there, right? So just putting it there, it doesn't mean that it doesn't draw the consumers in. They have to come looking for you, right? Or to be fed into your site in a different way. And that barrier to driving trial is then, levied on the brand, and is not just kind of taking place organically at the point of sale, through the retailers. Which is interesting.
Well, speaking of driving trial, I recently did a podcast interview with Betterment Retail Solutions, which is a distributor, a wellness distributor. They focus heavy on CBD, and so they deal with a lot of brands and they deal with a lot of retailers, and they've been really, really working with a lot of big convenience stores, and they've kind of hit on a really good means of driving trial in a few different ways. One was by having a broad assortment of different types of products and brands. So beverages, gummies, chocolates, shots, just a mix to appeal to everybody, but also making sure that the vendors they deal with have a lot of information on the packaging, and then that also using a lot of signage or like FAQ cards so that it takes the pressure off of the staff of having to explain things. In fact, the staff use a lot of these FAQs to learn themselves. They do a lot of training. Don't get me wrong. They do a lot of training with the executives, with the store leadership, but they have a lot of signage, very prominent displays, and a lot of information to kind of drive that impulse purchase. But then they also have been focusing on what they call um, Gen 2 products, which are basically products that are similar to what they're already getting. Everybody knows what a bottle of water is. They know what a chocolate bar is. They don't have to be educated on how to consume it the way you would like a tincture or something like that. And then keeping prices low. So that this way it's like, well, let me try it. But from the conversation that you and I had, it may encourage trial, but if it's just like a bottle of water, they may not get the full CBD effect. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's interesting because that C-store consumer is not necessarily the same consumer that is
Hmm.
driving, the majority of the market. So,
Hmm.
when we look at the average consumer overall, we see people that are using CBD every day. They're
Hmm.
using consistently. They're using, they've been using over a longer period of time. They're using higher dosage products, and they're using these products to really, oftentimes meet kind of medical need states, right?
Hmm.
For like your examples for your parents, right?
Yeah.
They may have chronic pain, they may have chronic anxiety, they may have chronic depression or chronic sleep problems or things like that. In which case, for those types of consumers, we have our personas at Brightfield, and we call them our daily symptom attackers or aging ailers. Potentially, those consumers are really looking for kind of a consistent experience, and they really need to be taking CBD every day as though it's a supplement, right? As CBD, it's not necessarily like taking an Advil. You don't
Hmm.
always get the full benefit on the first go round, right?
Hmm.
If I'm taking for a chronic pain condition, I need to use for 7 days, before I really get the full effects.
Hmm.
And then I, most heavily notice the impact of it after I've been off of it for 4 or 5 days, right?
Hmm.
For example. So it's more of, a bit of a different experience if you're using more for those kind of medical type of conditions,
Hmm.
right? But now, on the other hand, when you're looking at the C-store consumer, to your point, it is a lot easier to try products. It's a lot easier to try kind of these food and bev products, that may have a lower price point, that are a much more approachable form factor. And, the consumers love these products. I mean, we have there's a real challenge in scaling these products to date, but that's not really due to lack of consumer demand. It's really due to kind of the small number of channels of distribution that are willing to carry these products.
Yes.
Given the FDA, the lack of FDA
Yeah, like you
clarity
won't see
right
it in
now.
drug, you won't see it in I mean, you'll see it
Exactly.
in
Yeah.
smaller independent drugstores, but a CVS is not going to carry CBD beverages, or or they're going to go into it
Mhm.
slowly. They'll do the
Right.
topicals.
Exactly. So, as what those C-store consumers, really find, typically is that, what it works for is more of these kind of moderate type of, conditions,
Hmm.
or almost recreational type of, need state positionings of,
Hmm.
consumers that want to relax.
Hmm.
They want to take a little bite of their out of their day. They want to, do something a little bit better for their health,
Hmm.
or they may want to, substitute this for, an afternoon cup of coffee, or, or even a glass of wine at the end of the night, or a cigarette break, or, things like that. They're using it more for kind of distinct, specific, use cases and occasions. Oftentimes, many of these food and bev products, are used effectively for, in conjunction with athletic performance or
Hmm.
experience, whether that's kind of during or after for recovery or things
Yeah.
like that. But essentially, that C-store consumer is oftentimes very different from, the many of the other CBD consumers, persona segments of, CBD consumers. So if you want to win with the C-store channel, you need to have a strategy that's going to be really, razor focused on what's going to work in that channel and what's going to work for that consumer, because you can't necessarily expect that to, be a carryover into, the overall category. You're not necessarily going to see that, CBD water be a stepping stone into kind of a daily, tincture usage for, for more of those heavier users, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yep. And looking at your data here, it's just interesting seeing the difference between the older
Mhm.
and the younger consumers. And,
Yeah.
probably like the millennials and Gen Z
Mhm.
it looks like they're stressed out a little bit more by COVID
Yep.
than us Gen
That's
Xers.
another one
And
of our personas. We've got stressed out millennials are kind of some of the,
oh,
the top consumers
yeah.
of CBD.
Although Gen Xers are, I mean, it says 51% for the Gen
Yep.
Xers, but I'm guessing that's
Mhm.
probably the younger Gen Xers,
Mhm.
not the
Yeah.
older Gen Xers like me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's especially with COVID. I mean, that's
Mhm.
definitely caused a lot of stress for people, and
Yeah.
yeah, the younger ones especially.
Yeah, absolutely. For younger consumers, there's a lot more of a focus on, kind of treating themselves or, taking care of their mental health. There's much more of a mental health focus, with kind of more of the elder millennials slash Gen Xers. A lot of these, consumers are parents, and,
Hmm.
it's a really stressful time for parents right now, right? And, many of them have, more, financial responsibilities and obligations, and may have, be impacted by the pandemic, and, in some serious ways. So, that those types of, C-store positioned products, that may be more occasion based, maybe lower price points, can really serve as that affordable indulgence, right?
Hmm.
You might not in a pandemic, be willing to, spend $70 on a tincture or $90 on a tincture,
Hmm.
as kind of a starting point. But if you've had a rough day and you think that, $5, bottle of CBD infused water is going to kind of help you out a little bit, then, that may be something that you're willing to do for yourself.
Yep, and what Betterment does with their
Mhm,
convenience store customers is they get them in with those lower price,
mhm,
but then they work them towards the
mhm,
higher price, the tinctures and things like that. So
mhm,
they just make sure they merchandise everything because they're aiming for the consumer off the street
mhm,
that has a very limited knowledge of what's
mhm.
out there. So they need to give them
Yeah.
a lot of info at once and a lot of variety at once because they don't know what is going to resonate with them. But
Mhm,
once they're more educated and they know what their use case is going to be,
mhm,
they'll graduate more towards, or just they may find some that they like more and
mhm.
they'll graduate towards that. So what about, we were talking about brick and mortar.
Yeah.
What trends are you seeing just in general across all brick and mortar channels?
Yeah, well, one thing to hit on, that is good news for brick and mortar. The bottom stat here in the slide, is that, consumers, 53% of consumers reported, starting to purchase CBD through brick and mortar again.
Hmm.
So this is a good indication that, while some consumers may have this, the shift to online being permanent, for a lot of others, it was just a temporary band-aid,
Hmm.
because they just didn't feel comfortable going into a store, but they would prefer to do that, as they feel safer, and willing to do that. So that's
Hmm.
definitely interesting. But the, brick and mortar does have this great ability to drive trial, right? There's one channel that has really benefited, considerably from the pandemic is kind of that CBD specialty retailer
Hmm.
outlets, which is really interesting. I think a lot of people had, really expected that CBD specialty retailers would, not be able to survive once CBD products were really on the shelves of mass.
Hmm.
But really, what we're seeing is kind of the opposite. And even right now, two of the top brands in the space, the top 20 CBD brands, do have their own outlets, right? And are selling their own products exclusively there. And we do see, the share of consumers purchasing through, CBD specialty stores kind of increasing, dramatically versus the beginning of the pandemic. And, one thing that these stores, so, what is kind of that lesson, that retailers can take away and that brands can take away is not necessarily just that this one specialty channel is, phenomenal and amazing, but really the reason why consumers go into these stores is because they can do that product discovery there.
Hmm.
They can, those CBD specialty stores, are really kind of, matched by none in being able to educate consumers, right, on,
Yeah.
a wide variety of products and, what they can do. And because these stores are usually quite small and not, very heavily trafficked, right,
Hmm.
that, even in the midst of a pandemic, you can feel confident walking into these stores, knowing that you're not going to be kind of surrounded on all sides by a zillion different people and kind of patiently stand 6 feet away from somebody and ask all of your questions and have them answered in an environment where you feel safe and secure, right? So it really just iterates the point, I think, that, consumer education remains incredibly important, just absolutely incredibly important. And, with any channel strategy, it's going to be really important for brands to think about how they can educate the consumer in a way that makes sense for this channel, and, really reach those consumers. So, the point you were referencing before, through C-stores, it's important to have, you're not necessarily going to expect kind of the store clerk that is working there to be, a fountain of information on this. They sell a lot of different products, and that's not necessarily their bread and butter or their background. So having, in-store collateral is really important. But it also, in having, those questions answered on package or in-store displays, things like that can really, demonstrate the credibility of the products, but also, again, make sure the consumer knows when they see your product, on those shelves, what can they expect out of this? What do they expect it to do for them, right? Because they're not, in this day and age, they're not going to buy just to buy. They're going to buy to solve a need that they have, in a need state that they, that they're facing right now. And, that's something that can really echo through to, through all channels, as well.
Yeah, I like in the specialty stores, it's more like a Genius Bar or vape
Yeah.
shop kind of environment.
Yeah.
They go, they hang out, they learn what's new,
Mhm.
all of those things that, frankly, mass retail is not set up to do. Mass retail
Right.
is all about turnover.
Right.
You get the products, you get them out, limited
Mhm.
consultation. You don't consult with a store
Yeah.
associate in a mass retail location. They're all about getting, as high a turnover as they can. But
Yeah.
you expect, and you don't expect to, but you go to American Shaman or your CBD store,
Mhm.
and you're going to spend time there, like you said, to discover new
Mhm.
products, to learn about what's new, and
Mhm.
it's just a different kind of selling. I think there is a place for both.
Absolutely. And, with in mass channels, it's a bit of a different approach, right? Because you have to, your products have to be able to jump off the shelves, right?
Mhm,
They have to, oftentimes they're behind a lockbox, right? So you have to find a way to make your products look really appealing on shelf, right?
mhm,
And, look really appealing, to consumers enough that they're willing to kind of take that leap of faith. You have to really, in many circumstances, make kind of your packaging, your brand names, your positioning, or
mhm.
the marketing that you do previously, really kind of speak for itself of like, what does your product do, right?
Mm,
What
yep.
can consumers expect? And make sure that, when they go in, and through mass channels, most of the market is still topicals, but as, if a consumer is coming into a Walgreens or a mass channel, looking for products, next to there or not too far away from there on the shelves will be other OTC products like a Bengay or a Tiger Balm,
Mhm,
or positioned, other products that are positioned for similar conditions. So you have to beat those products, right? That those are kind of that competitive set. And it's, while pricing is really important and a lever that a lot of brands are pulling right now, for the brands that have leaned too much into pricing discounts, then it really has a significant impact on their top line as well as their bottom line, right? If you drop your if you drop your prices, you can still only move so much volume. So
yeah.
we definitely encourage brands to be very to be mindful of that strategy and not have it be kind of a race to the bottom from a pricing standpoint.
And speaking of pricing and
Mhm.
locking products up, I guess
Yeah.
that's one of the other benefits of offering lower price products, is that you don't have to lock them up. They're
Yeah.
not so costly that,
Yeah.
you could just put them on the shelf.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another great thing. It's interesting. Many brands said that, or many retailers have said that they started locking up products because people would steal them because they thought that they would get them high, right?
Yeah.
That they could use these products as a substitute for weed, and so people would steal them, or they may be embarrassed, to be able to be seen purchasing them or things like that. But they're very, many of them are expensive products. So,
Hmm.
you don't need to lock up a, $5, $6 bottle of water,
Yeah.
or a shot, or, things like that. Many convenience stores still do, lock up some of the price point, some of the products, and they are, still at risk for, for theft and shrinkage, but, it's much more approachable, of a proposition if you aren't in these kind of high volume, stores where, the clerks lose visibility into things.
Yeah. So you have again that balance of
Mhm.
generating trial
Mhm.
versus locking them up and protecting the inventory. So,
Yeah.
well, speaking of products,
Yeah.
are you seeing any particular types of products that are emerging over the past few months?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's definitely been some significant trends, from a product landscape. It was interesting. Drinks had quite an interesting year, in 2020, with some kind of divergent focuses. There on the one side, they were very difficult to commercialize, because there were such limited distribution channels. But we saw so many new launches,
Mhm.
of small brands, with very specific positionings and kind of, day parts that are, wildly different, and, anything from kind of coffee to kind of a alcohol substitute to athletically positioned products. There was a huge amount of innovation in very small brands, in the drink space. Many of the top players in the drink space themselves, were, found it difficult to scale beyond where they had been, or, took some hits from a retail standpoint due to the shifting retail landscape.
Mhm.
But there's definitely an indication that, that there is a strong market there once the world changes a little bit. And,
Mhm.
when the world changes a little bit, I mean, both we get, the double the double whammy of the combination of, the FDA finally giving guidance, and also, the pandemic, being in our rear view mirror, and consumers, actually having impulse purchases and going into stores a lot more than, they previously had. So that's definitely an area, a category that is, I have my eye on.
Mhm.
There's a lot of interesting activity in, in 2020 that, doesn't isn't necessarily immediately obvious, when looking at kind of the top line sales for the industry, but, a lot of activity and strong opportunities there. The other one is, is this beauty and skincare, right? Beauty and skincare topicals. Now, topicals overall saw this massive jump in, in 2019, just simply by being able to, have, be able to make it on the shelves of these,
Mhm.
large brick and mortar retailers,
Sure.
and a lot of consumers, like your parents, right, and mine, you know, using these products for aches, for pain, for all these kind of chronic, conditions, and they became a lot more, approachable or available, and, things like that.
Mhm.
But, beauty and skincare topicals have really, seen, consistent and significant growth, through 2020, which is interesting. And, this isn't kind of a J curve growth, but it has been kind of that, that consistent, significant growth in consumer adoption on this. And, it's been interesting as we've been looking at, looking at kind of these global trends in 2020, of consumers being, many women and men, but, female consumers being a lot, less focused on color cosmetics and more kind of skincare obsessed, right?
Mhm.
And, as you spend a lot less time going out and about, and, being out in front of people, there's been a lot less of a drive for color cosmetics, but more of a drive to kind of take care of your skin, and treat yourself and indulge in your skin. A lot more, focus on face masks and serums and anti-aging cream, and, all sorts of different kind of proliferations of these types of products, have emerged. Many from smaller companies,
Mhm.
that have, that maybe naturals focused naturals focused, beauty companies that will launch CBD line extensions, small companies that will launch a CBD, anti-aging cream, or, a small CBD line, and have those, picked up through various channels. They've been able to benefit from everything from kind of these, beauty and skincare specialty retailers, from things like subscription boxes, from things, just e-commerce sites, direct to consumer, sales as well, and direct selling channels, and things like that. So we've seen a lot of growth, a lot of innovation in this space, a lot of room for additional innovation in this space. So that's definitely been, very kind of interesting and exciting, on the healthcare and beauty, side of, of CBD, and would definitely say that, we are, Joe, as we've been tracking this industry and covering this industry for, 3-4 years now, and that first generation of products was not what they are today. Let's just put it that way, right? A lot of it, definitely felt like weed in a cream, kind of thing. And, this generation of products that we saw released in 2020, is just an order of magnitude, improved in quality. There has been a real focus on kind of nailing the textures and the scents and the other active ingredients. And so there's some really fantastic, sophisticated products, out there, and that pace of innovation is not showing any sign of slowing. And it's really clear from both the consumer adoption in the survey itself, as well as kind of the conversations around CBD, which we track through our social listening, components, that this is something that is not going away and is continuing to accelerate, and gain more and more attention with consumers.
Are you seeing more brands launching that are startups, or are you seeing like regular skin and beauty brands adding a CBD line extension? What's the ratio?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a combination of both. So, I won't say that, the largest, beauty and personal care giants aren't really going into this space yet. But the beauty scene and kind of the skincare scene, has, especially on more of that prestige side of the market, is populated by a lot of small brands to begin with. And so, there's a lot of small brands that, in the beauty space that have been launching, CBD line extensions, and they may already have some strong kind of retail, or distribution relationships in place that make it, or supply chains in place that make it easy to capitalize on this. We also see, some new brands and entrepreneurs getting into the space. Most of them have, hail from a beauty background, right? So, have, experience in, in beauty for many years, and then are just kind of applying CBD as another functional ingredient. And then on the last side of it, there are some CBD companies, that are, launching successful, CBD lines, CBD beauty lines, off of their kind of flagship brand. So CBD FX is a really good example of this. They first came up out of the vape space, but now have a much more kind of, innovative and standard positioned, brand that has, a lot of different, SKUs on more of kind of the supplement side, of the gummies and tinctures and capsules and things like that. But they also have this really, strong beauty line that they've developed that is one of the largest in the industry, and includes everything from face masks to a lot of different types of face masks, facial cleansers and serums and foot masks and things like that are just, a really strong array of products that appeal to consumers, particularly millennial consumers, in a really strong way.
Excellent. Well, before I get into our last topic, I just want to remind everybody that we're going to have a Q&A as soon as we wrap up. So you can submit your questions still through the Q&A dashboard down below underneath the slides. So speaking of brands, what are some of the biggest things that brands need to do or need to focus on for 2021?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is definitely a year where, brands need to be able to win, right? Whereas in previous years, a lot of brands have really just been focused on kind of, riding the wave and getting new consumers into the space. While there are some new consumers entering, the space today, the category is a lot more stable than it was previously. So, what brands really need to focus on is kind of taking a very, specific and tailored approach and a very intentional approach to kind of how they're reaching consumers, how they're driving new consumers into the top of the funnel and developing that strong relationship with consumers and making sure that matches really strongly with their channel strategy, right? Brands have been taking a different approach on this in 2020. It's going to be increasingly important for in 2021. But as we look at this, this new model, again, the pandemic is not in our rearview mirror yet, and quite frankly, it's not going to be, until the end of this year, if we're lucky. So brands are really going to have to drive, build that relationship directly with consumers themselves. So, there's been some really interesting examples, I think, of how, brands have done this in different ways and, really driven this in different ways. On the one side, you have, some campaigns that have been really interesting from an awareness standpoint. So, CBD Distillery, for example, this year did a big giveaway for anybody that had never tried their products before to get a free full-size product, full-size bottle of capsules, which drove an incredible amount of new consumers, into their funnel and into their pipeline, and really had shifted and opened up their consumer segment from being more focused on, older consumers, which they target really effectively, but had kind of opened the door to this completely different consumer segment that was much more millennial focused and much more, younger consumer focused. Some other brands have taken, very intentional kind of channel specific strategies, right? That have allowed them to more effectively kind of nail down, what works really well in certain channels. So, with Medterra, for example, we saw kind of the rise of, some of their professional lines, that really effectively target, independent pharmacies. We saw the development of more kind of a single serve. Certainly a lot more, brands are approaching convenience stores in a more intentional way. And that is definitely an example. Actually, we have a slide here on, Hemp Bomb, for example, is a company that's been really successful through the convenience store channel, that has a very, intentional strategy there, where essentially you have, products that are, designed in a positioning that is meant to resonate not with kind of the general wellness or general naturals-based consumer, but for that, consumer that is shopping at C-stores, that is, looking for additional kind of functional ingredients, but is a bit less overall wellness focused, with a very intentional kind of pricing strategy, small pack sizes, in-store designs, really designed to drive trial there, really kind of taking that approach and being kind of hyper focused and not trying to boil the ocean. And that's an area that, I think is important for companies to focus on this year, is, really nailing down a strong strategy for specific consumer segments, for specific channels, that's going to land and resonate, because they essentially have their window of time, before the big boys come in, is really kind of shrinking, right? Once the FDA says go, there and provides those regulations, there will be a lot more of competition from, mainstream CPG, companies. And so it's really, really important for consumers right now to or for brands right now to kind of build that awareness and build that reputation and build their moat, and both with consumers and with retailers as well, show that you can win on shelf and develop that awareness. But awareness, it's still a very, very fragmented market right now, and those consumer loyalties are just not tied up yet by any stretch of the imagination.
And that's a good point. What you just mentioned, once they have to realize that once the big guys, your Procter and Gamble, your Unilever, and once they start going into this big, they already have the retail relationships.
Yeah.
So you got to establish yourself now so that you can hold on to that space once they do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been interesting that, those some of the large companies have kind of started to dabble a
Hmm.
little bit, but just put a pinky toe in the industry.
Yeah.
And, with the pinky toe approach, they're not really that competitive with the largest players, right?
Hmm.
By any stretch of the imagination. For those CPG companies to be successful in this space, they have to go in and go hard, right?
Hmm.
Just as anybody else does. So, right now, even with some of the CPG companies dabbling, they're
Hmm.
not going to be successful through retailers, and retailers should be focusing more on, the brands that are going to go hard into it,
Yeah.
right now, and put the marketing resources behind it. So there's a great opportunity for retailers to develop those relationships with brands today, but those brands need to like the time is now, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes. Don't wait that much longer. It's gonna be too
yeah,
late.
absolutely. Mhm,
So great. We're gonna jump into
mhm,
the Q&A, and just to let everybody know, we are recording this, so
mhm.
we will have this available to share with you following. So the first question is, what is the typical shelf life for most CBD
Mhm.
products, and do many CBD companies offer closeout or liquidation inventory opportunities?
Yeah, so we've definitely seen a lot of this, closeout and liquidation of inventory lately. There's been a lot of CBD companies that have not made it. Right, not made it out of first gear. It's a very,
Hmm.
very competitive industry. There's more than 3,000 brands in the space, and a lot of them did not survive 2020 by any stretch of the imagination. So there was also a lot of, products that were on retail shelves that once the pandemic hit, the foot traffic through those retailers tanked. So there was a lot of liquidation, through CBD, of CBD products through 2020, due to some of that plummeting demand, or brands just going out of business. Now the exact shelf life of CBD products is going to vary. Immensely, on whether you're talking about a food product or a tincture product or a capsule or et cetera. And so, it really varies. There's not kind of a good, hands out, a good number for those, but it really varies a lot. But definitely is a lot of closeout and liquidation, right now, and there's a lot of opportunity for that. Mhm,
Huh. That could be an
mhm,
opportunity for some chains, and
mhm,
maybe like some of the dollar stores and that are around. And
mhm,
and just to talk about something you mentioned before, where I know that some of the dollar store channel retailers
mhm.
are looking for like single serve, like you mentioned
Yeah.
before, that the convenience stores are using. The dollar stores are looking at a lot of
Mhm.
similar products, maybe not in the consumer edibles space, but like a bath bomb, like a single packet,
Yeah.
or things
Mhm,
that they can do
mhm,
for their markets. So somebody asked if there's any insights you could share around when the
mhm.
FDA might make a ruling on CBD. It's the
Yeah, this is
magic
the topic
question.
the magic question. This is the topic everybody wants to know about, right? Let me get out my crystal ball. No, so just recently, at the close of the Trump administration, the FDA put out, a piece saying essentially they're waiting for more real world data on what the impact of CBD is. So what they're really looking for there is, there were some initial concerns out of the Epidiolex clinical research around liver toxicity. So throughout the course of 2020, there was a very substantial study done, that most of the many large CBD brands contributed to, that provided that real world experience, or that real world data, on how the consumers, how patients and consumers, bodies react to CBD, engaged, and love, looked at that liver toxicity level as well as a lot of other potential side effects and things like that. So that study is set to publish in the spring, right? Around March of this year. So, with that study coming out, there's an expectation that, as those results are released to the FDA, that thereafter there will be more a movement towards that FDA guidance. So we at Brightfield are expecting that to be about the middle of 2021. one, about the midpoint of this year. Again, there's a lot of competing priorities from the
Yeah,
FDA's.
FDA's been a little busy these
They've
past
been a
couple of
little
months. Yeah.
busy, right? This whole pandemic thing, right? So they've got a lot of competing priorities, but they know that, they've, certainly indicated that this is a priority for them. They know they don't get forever on it. So, we are expecting that ruling this year. Mhm.
Very cool. Any updates you can share on market share percentage by distribution channel? This person actually did their homework. They know some of your previous numbers.
They do. I love it
Yeah,
when people
yeah.
cite our numbers to us.
But curious about pharmacy in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't have those stats in front of me right now. They are all, of course, available for all of our subscribers. In our portal. If you'd like to see those, let us know. We do also put out, frequent freebie downloads, in there on the different channel splits. So, there's more details if anybody wants to reach out to me. Thereafter, happy to share some additional stats there. Mhm.
Excellent. And just to wrap up, are there any other trends we can expect to see in the CBD space this year?
Oh, there's a lot, but expect a lot more interesting product development. We didn't touch on any of these development of new, products with minor cannabinoids, but I definitely have my eye on that. We saw the first generation of those, really hitting shelves, in
What's that called
2020.
again?
The minor cannabinoids,
Minor
the minor.
cannabinoid.
So everybody talks about CBD. There's also
Oh, like
products
CDN or like,
CBN
okay,
and
gotcha.
CBG. So those products are, there's, if we think there's education challenges with CBD, there's definitely education challenges with CBN and
Yeah.
CBG, for sure. But there's a lot of interest and excitement about those, for some more specific positionings,
Hmm.
related to sleep in particular for CBN. There's, things related to weight loss or brain health, for CBG, also, and some other positionings also. But there's the input price of those products has plummeted, so it's a lot easier to incorporate those into products now than it ever was before. So I think we'll continue to see some more innovation in that space, and we'll see whether it lands effectively with consumers.
Well, I
So,
remember speaking of CBN, I
mhm,
went to we had a session in Vegas the
mhm,
beginning of last year. I think it was in February before they shut everything down. And
mhm.
I went over to Planet 13, which is
Yes.
a huge
Disney
dispensary.
World of cannabis.
Yeah, it's a cannabis dispensary, but they have a ton of CBD.
Yeah.
And what
Mhm.
was really cool about it, and this is something I recommend for everybody to do if they want to do a little research, in addition to subscribing to you guys. But I went in there, and what was really, and I don't know if other dispensaries are like that. Well, I've been to a couple of others, and they seem to be the same, but there was like no rush to get me out the door. There's no rush to get. So they had I got up to the bud tender
Mhm.
and I just picked his brain for
Yep.
15 minutes
Yep.
because there's no lines. Everybody's assigned a number. You get a number on the screen, you go to your
Mhm.
person, and when you're done, you're done. So I just picked his brain, and
Mhm.
CBN was one of, back then, he said
Mhm.
that was like the next big thing, and it's
Yep.
specifically for sleep. But he
Mhm.
said that he's got a lot of customers asking about that.
Mhm.
And these guys, and I would guess it's the same with the specialty CBD places, they're so
Absolutely.
knowledgeable and they know the trends are coming up. So I
Yeah.
just picked his brain, and that was the first thing he said was
Yeah.
CBN is going to be the next big thing.
Yeah, no, Green Roads just at the end of last year, Green Roads came out with this huge CBN, and melatonin line, for sleep, which is really, really fantastic line of products. There's a lot of, additional products. I think that, I think CBDFX, CBD Distillery has some,
Hmm.
even on the THC, on the regulated cannabis side of things, Plus and, Kiva have CBN products that are kind of ratioed with THC also,
Hmm.
and in some other areas. So there is a lot of innovation coming on that space, both on kind of the hemp side of things as well as on the regulated cannabis side of things. So definitely keep an eye out on that. A lot more products positioned for need states, and I think a lot more inclusion of additional functional ingredients,
Hmm.
as well. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Bethany,
Mhm.
for all this great information. And for everybody out there, thank you for joining us. And Bethany and I will be doing a lot more regular content. We have several videos up on our blog, several blog posts. We will be doing more during the year, but so make sure you're following ECRM on LinkedIn, follow Brightfield Group, and you have all the information on the screen right now as far as the email and Brightfield Group's website. So make sure you're checking those out as well. Again, thank you, Bethany. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.